Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right. For today's episode, we're going to talk about rest. And I want to talk about this because I'm coming off a bit of a burnout break. I didn't post last week. I kept my posting and my content creation and any kind of creation really at a minimal because I have been burnt out. I went really hard the last couple of weeks, which was great. But I know that burnout is inevitable for me. It is a cycle I go through constantly. So whereas in the past, I would really shame myself for experiencing burnout, for experiencing the dips in motivation and productivity, the lows, I now know to expect them and I know that they are part of the process. So I'm a little bit less shameful. However, I still experience that shame. I still experience the feelings of not being good enough because I'm not doing enough. And one thing that I've really had to remind myself of and really internalize is that rest is a requirement. And I wrote about this topic over on my Substack. So if you're interested in reading more about this, feel free to subscribe to me over there. But for a long time, and I'm sure many other people also feel this way, I believe that rest was a privilege, right? It's not something that you should necessarily want even, but also not believe that you deserve it. Or you can only rest if you've earned the right to rest, as though it is some sort of a prize at the end of however much productivity you need to have in order to be worthy of rest. Now, as I've gotten older and I've realized that that's not sustainable and it does not make sense for the human condition, for nature in general, I'm trying to really understand that rest is a requirement. It's a necessary part of the process. It is not outside of the process of existing. It is part of existing. It is part of being a human being. It is not a privilege or a luxury of being a human being. However, of course, for many of us and our circumstances, rest is a luxury because we are forced to be productive within our system. We are forced to have to earn a certain amount of money to survive and experience the things we want to experience. So I'm not trying to disregard that by any means. I'm just trying to change the perspective that I think many of us have internalized through years of conditioning, depending on your background, your upbringing, whatever, society, media, culture, all that stuff, that rest is somehow not what you should be doing. In reality, rest is exactly what you need to be doing, equally as much as doing things. You have to rest and you have to do. But the two are not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand. You need both in order to exist as a person. And so this past week, where I realized that I was really burnt out, I had lost motivation, I had lost desire, I had lost drive to create, to engage, to do. I have to remind myself, because I always fall into this trap where I start to think that because I'm feeling this way, it must mean that I don't want to do the things that I did before anymore. I'm somehow over it. I'm done. It's no longer serving me. I go into black and white thinking, which I know a lot of my followers do. We have this mentality of, okay, if I'm feeling this way, it must mean this. And there's safety in thinking that way. There's safety in having the certainty of, okay, if I'm feeling discontent with this thing going on, if I'm feeling tired or overwhelmed, it must mean that I don't want it. Because it's easier to then just drop something and, let it go and redirect and whatever. But realistically, as I've learned through my own experience, that's not what it means at all. It most of the time means that I just need to rest. I need to recover. I need to recuperate, which is not a bad thing, which is not a sign that this isn't what I want. It's a sign that I just need to replenish my fuel to continue doing the thing that I want to do. And I always forget it. I always forget it when I'm in it, right? When you're in it, and I'm sure anybody else who experiences this understands this, but when you're in it, when you're in the burnout, when you're in that depletion, you feel like you have to get out. This is not what you're supposed to do, because if you feel like this, then it must be wrong. It must be bad. Now, of course, believe your feelings, validate them, but don't necessarily act in accordance with the fear that associates itself with the feeling. What I mean by that is, a lot of the time, I'll walk you through my thought process when this happens to me, but a lot of the time what happens is, okay, I'm doing what I love to do. I'm creating, I'm working with people, I'm doing all these things that I genuinely enjoy that gives me a feeling of fulfillment and satisfaction and recognition, right? All those things that I love. And then I slowly start noticing my energy levels dip. I notice myself feeling not as motivated, not necessarily feeling the energy to do it. And what happens is I'm like, oh, okay, I'm feeling low, I'm feeling depleted. And then the fear that kicks in is that, oh, then I must be on the wrong path. I must be doing something wrong if I'm feeling this way. And then sometimes in my past, I've acted on that fear, which means that I abandon the thing that I think is triggering this fear, if that makes sense. Now what I've learned is to validate the feeling, lean into the feeling of losing energy, of feeling, depleted, of feeling like I need a break. Lean into that, validate it, believe it, but don't believe and lean into the fear that crops up, because that fear is trying to help you get back to where you were before, to get back to that heightened level of energy, that heightened productivity. But that's not sustainable long-term forever. You're supposed to go through these ups and downs. That's part of the process. The fear is telling you, oh, if you're in a down right now, you must be wrong. There must be something wrong, which therefore means that you are wrong and means you will be abandoned, rejected, hated, whatever other fears and narratives pop up for you. But that's not what it means at all. That's just the fear trying to make you safe, which we can appreciate it for trying to do that. We can understand why it's doing that, but we don't have to necessarily identify with it. You can believe your feelings, trust your feelings. I feel depleted. I feel like I have no energy, but don't identify with the fear that attaches to it. Act in accordance with what the most loving action would be once you validate and believe that feeling. So the most loving action for me, when I noticed that I was feeling a loss of energy, a loss of motivation, wasn't to berate myself, hate myself, try to abandon things because I must be doing something wrong and I should always be at a heightened level of energy. Although, don't get me wrong, that feeling is always kind of there. It's always trying to get me to do that, right? I haven't completely gotten rid of it, but now I know that the loving act is not to lean into that. It's to believe that feeling and replenish myself, give myself the time and space to rest and recover. And that can feel very uncomfortable because we're not told to rest, but it's so necessary. It's so vital in our process. You cannot exist without also resting. You cannot do without resting. You have to. You don't have another option. Your body's not going to give you another option. So I know it might feel like you have some control to decide that I don't need rest. I'm going to just keep going. I'm going to keep pushing through it. But you don't have another option. That is a false sense of control because your body, your mind, your psyche will give out eventually. Now, of course, there are many times where maybe we feel less capable than we actually are, and we don't push ourselves when we can, when we have more to give and provide and establish for ourselves. And that is not good for us either, right? We need to know when we need to push ourselves a bit more, when we're holding ourselves back, when we're infantilizing ourselves a bit. Yeah, we have to push ourselves in those moments. But then it's also important to distinguish between when you are actually depleted, when you actually need just time for rest and recovery and recuperation. That's not a bad thing. And to not see it as a bad thing, to not attach a morality to rest and productivity. There is no morality. It's just about intention, right? What's the intention behind the life you're trying to live? If the intention is to always be productive because productivity equals this sense of superiority or morality or whatever, then yes, you're going to always live a life where you can never allow yourself to rest. And that's not going to feel very good. But if the intention is, I want to live a life that's enjoyable for me, that means also letting yourself rest when necessary and also pushing yourself when necessary. So I try my best to lean into intention. It's easier said than done. It's not always easy. I don't want it to come off like I know how to do it now and I'm perfect and I've really I've elevated beyond any other human being. I haven't. It's just what I have to constantly learn over and over again. I cycle through these things. So every time I cycle through it, I learn something new about myself. I learn something new about the process. I still might fall into old habits and behaviors and beliefs, but every time I try to reframe it, I try to look at it from a different perspective. I try to be kind to myself. That's the point, ultimately. Be kind to yourself, right? That's it. So the one thing I want to finish this episode off with is believe your feelings. Believe the way you're experiencing things. Trust yourself. Trust that you're not overreacting and your need for rest is not laziness. You're not lazy for needing rest. Don't believe those narratives. Believe yourself. Believe that you're feeling this way. Validate that you're feeling this way. but lean into a loving response, not a fear-based response. That is the crux of, I think, most of the things I talk about, right? How can we operate from a place of love, care, consideration, compassion towards ourselves and towards other people, of course. But, if you're kind to yourself, that also tends to extend to other people. But how do you act from a place of love, care, compassion, consideration versus acting from a place of fear? Fear will convince you that it is right. Fear will be erratic and loud and aggressive to get you to listen to it because it believes that it is the thing that you need to do to stay safe. Love, kindness, compassion, consideration are more subtle, but are better for you in the long run. Again, this is just my own experience, my own opinion from what I've learned through my own process and how I've been able to just make myself feel a little bit better, to not hate myself as much when I have to go through these experiences, to learn to look at things from a more loving light, a more positive light towards myself, ultimately. And that does not mean you shouldn't hold yourself accountable when necessary, that you shouldn't call yourself out when necessary. Of course, that is also loving. That is also respectful. It's not, one or the other, black and white in that way. There's a lot of nuance to this. So yeah, I hope this was helpful for anybody else who struggles with feeling guilty for resting, who feels like they don't deserve to rest unless they've earned rest. You need rest whether you want to or not. Your body won't give you another choice. Your mind won't give you another option. You have to do it. So since you're going to have to do it, whether you like it or not, if burnout's going to take you regardless, you might as well be aware of it, prepare yourself for it, consciously make decisions that help you navigate it when you're in it so that you don't feel like you have to abandon everything, or you don't make preparations to help you when you're finally out of it so that you can, get back into things without feeling like you have to rebuild a bunch of bridges that you burned when you were in the headspace. That's, I think, what I want to leave anybody else who's experiencing this with for this episode, because it's vital, it's important, and to not guilt ourselves for it and shame ourselves for it, because we need to do it. It has to happen, and it's good for us, and it's okay. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope it gave you a different perspective. If you want to talk about these things with me in more detail, I work with people one-to-one. We can have a little chat, explore these things more. I also write about these topics over on my Substack, and I make videos for anyone who doesn't know. I post them on Instagram and TikTok. Other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.